Welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. Today, we're going to be talking about the Triple-A Tacoma Rainiers. Later on in this episode, I'll be speaking with Darby Robinson, who is a park ranger with Mount Rainier National Park. And I'll be speaking with Chris Trebon, who is a Mariners fan with a unique perspective on the Tacoma Rainiers. And of course, Dan Simon of Studio Simon is back with another Studio Simon Stumper. Right now, I'm very happy to be joined by Aaron Artman, who is the president for the Tacoma Rainiers. Aaron has been with the team since 2007. So you've been there with Aaron for a couple of versions of this Rainiers brand. Aaron, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I have. We've been through 3 iterations, but I think this one's going to last the test of time.
This one is not going anywhere. So, people, I think in general, are familiar with Mount Rainier as a geological feature, right? It's a mountain in the Pacific Northwest that if you have driven anywhere in the Pacific Northwest on a clear day, you've probably seen Mount Rainier. But can you tell me just how it came to be that either directly or indirectly, this Triple-A baseball team in Tacoma, Washington is named for this nearby mountain?
So it's an interesting historical story, really, because it's actually a Seattle name. And if there's one thing you should know about Tacoma, is Tacoma doesn't like anything they get handed from Seattle, right? Seattle's big brother. I always do the analogy of, Seattle is San Francisco and Tacoma is Oakland. So we're a lot grittier. We're smaller, and the center of the universe up here is allegedly in Seattle. And so we have a little chip on our shoulder down here. And when George Foster, as I understand it, from Foster Farms Air, purchased the Rainiers in 1995, at that point they were the Tacoma Tigers, and he wanted to name it the Rainiers.
Is that because of all of the tigers in Washington? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
All right, that's good. That makes a lot of sense.
A lot of sense. Well, Tacoma Tigers even goes back even further. That was the first professional baseball team in the Puget Sound area, was the Tacoma Tigers back in the turn of the century. So that's where that came from.
Okay.
So George Foster named it the Rainiers, our franchise, the Rainiers. And for a long time, people weren't in love with it. They wanted to go back to being the Tigers because it was that Seattle name. And the Seattle name of that team dates back to the old Rainier beer legacy. And during that time, he created a new Rainiers script and used Mariners colors. And the logo itself, though, was almost looked to me, although now it's super cool and throwback and people buy it in droves, but it almost looked to me like the logo that was on the hat looked to me like a logo that should be on a company letterhead, right? It had the full Tacoma Rainiers on there. It had the mountain. I laugh every time we order new batches of it because personally I'm like, that is not a great sports logo, right? It should have an icon, but people love it. It's come back into style. In fact, we're doing a 90s throwback. Our throwback weekends get stale because we just keep rotating through our 6 affiliates we've had besides the Mariners. So we are gonna go back and have a full-on 90s theme and wear the teal and have hats players wear with that mark. Anyway, I got here and I said, that's not a logo. That's a letterhead logo. We need something else on our hat. And we had this weird compassy logo, kind of playing off the Mariners, but in Rainier's colors with the navy and red, from I think 2009 to 2013. How we arrived at the R is the R existed in the script of the Rainiers that went across the jersey, but it was never separated as an icon like it used to be in the Seattle teams. And some smart people on our staff said, hey, why don't we throw an R on the hat? And just on a hat, and let's see if it sells. And I said, yeah, that's a great mark. We should see if that sells. And at that point, we did not like the compass logo anymore. It had been a nice bridge, but we knew we needed something more permanent. So how the R became our icon and our logo and how we use it, and we are Tacoma and our city and all these things, is kind of an antithesis to your typical logo thing. We didn't hire an agency. We didn't go through a design process. Literally, those hats started selling out like crazy. And we said, well, here's an idea. This is our best selling hat. People seem to love this mark. There's a lot we can do with it. Let's make it our logo. And so we made the R our logo. And we still use the same script that was developed in 1995 by George Foster and his team. going across the jersey, but really that R stands for everything we do and incorporate so many ways into the brand. And that was launched in 2014. And, you know, as we developed that, at the same time, we really started thinking about how this new stadium that we've renovated, the team's becoming more popular. You know, the R should be a source of pride for the city, and everything we do with this stadium should be kind of a beacon of aspiration for this city. And once we started thinking that way from a business perspective, things really took off and generated the merchandise sales and the kind of cult following the R has, quite frankly, all over the world. I mean, my parents saw our hat in Wimbledon. A British guy was wearing it. We see it on golf tournaments. We see it at other sporting events, and it's just fantastic.
Well, it is, you know, it's these single letter logos, right? You know, they probably would never get out of the first focus group these days, but like you said, you didn't do the focus groups. And so, you know, you were able just to implement that. The R, oh, first of all, I want to say your assessment of the original logo with the, you know, the full Tacoma, the clip art baseball, the Rainier script, the 3 colors in the illustration of the mountain itself, you know, it is very much an illustration and not a logo, like you say. Yes. So it's not, you know, something that can be iconic. The R that you currently have, the red R, looks similar to, but not identical to the Rainier beer, which you mentioned as having a tie to the team back in the Seattle days. What is the current relationship? And I'll full disclosure, I've been to one Tacoma Rainiers game. We're going back this year with a van full of guys on our Baseball Palooza road trip. We're hitting the Pacific Northwest for the first time. We'll be there in August. But I spent a good portion of this game hanging out at the R Bar in left field, which was a great place to watch the game, a patio overlooking the field while you're drinking a Rainier
the fire
beer.
Pit and all that.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was a great experience. I also should say that it was the day of, I just ran the Seattle Rock and Roll half marathon. And so we went straight from the half marathon to the Rainiers game. And so we enjoyed a couple of beverages to...
You needed to be hydrated after that.
Well, that's what the Rainier beer is there for. Exactly. So anyway, I mean, obviously the R Bar was a part of that. What's the relationship between the brands and the team and the beer now?
So it's the relationship's fine. It's friendly. We when the R was developed, Rainier beer wasn't a brand again yet. So actually we kind of have front position on that. And the way that works is that's in our case, it's limited to, you know, sports merchandise, things of that nature, icons within our brand, and they have it more for beer. We have never had to get into a legal wrangling over the difference in the R's. I happen to find our R to be a little bit girthier and more elegant. Their R's a little bit skinnier. And, but, you know, most people, I believe, you know, the diehard people in Tacoma will say that's our R. It's different. I think the most people around the world would associate the two together if they're familiar with both brands. So there's a relationship of probably both of us liking and seeing the R and the different way it's used, but there's not an official marketing relationship, and we work well together separately in peace.
Okay, well that's interesting. I mean, because it's I didn't actually realize that there was no formal relationship there. No. I knew they were not the same R, and I have to say, whenever I see a Rainiers cap, that I look carefully at it, because I went to the University of Richmond, which the Richmond R is in the same vein, right? It's a script capital R, different from the Rainiers R. Okay, so I guess there's probably no formal relationship between the team and the mountain, but what is your personal relationship with the mountain? Do you go hiking there? I mean, I know you can see it beyond the outfield wall when it's a clear day from the ballpark. The mountain itself, what role does it play in the life of the Tacoman?
So it's really funny because I see Tacoma as a waterfront town. You know, we're surrounded by water basically almost in every direction besides east where the mountain is. So that's mostly what I associate Tacoma with. And we also have the I think the largest natural deep water port in the United States. And there's a lot of industry down there. And then there's beautiful little islands and kind of the more touristy side of the sound. So I'm scared to admit that I had not been to Mount Rainier until this past summer.
Okay.
And see, I grew up in the Portland area, so Mount Hood was my mountain. So I kind of had I like Mount Hood. I like that it has a sharp point on the top. This Mount Rainier thing, looks like it blew at some point. It was absolutely fantastic. I mean, so there's ski resorts there associated with it. There's places you can stay. My family and I went up to the lodge and went on a hike. And I mean, you would have thought you were in the Swiss Alps. Like, it was absolutely beautiful. So I'm a relatively novice Mount Rainier aficionado, but I can tell you it's absolutely dynamite. But it has a lot of history to it. It used to be named Mount Tacoma. That was changed maybe in the late 1800s. I think the namesake of the mountain was actually a British admiral who won a naval battle, so it kind of doesn't make sense for a mountain in the United States. You might have to look up the history on that. But it's got tribal significance, it's got historical significance, and it's a massive, beautiful national park. A couple ski resorts, on the kind of foothills or side of it, and it looms large. And there's some fantastic points like the R bar, as well as the home run porch, where you have just beautiful views out on a clear day while you're watching the game. So yeah, it's kind of it's really a symbol of summer's finally here, spring's here, beautiful fall day. Like, when the mountain's out, it's a good day in the Northwest.
Absolutely.
When mountains behind clouds, we're like, it may not be the best day today in the Northwest.
Yeah. So you mentioned, the sort of the lack of the focus groups and the huge marketing firms and all that sort of thing in developing this brand. One of the things that, in today's minor league baseball landscape that you notice about a brand like this is that it is decidedly not wacky, right? Like, it's a more serious approach to branding a baseball team. That obviously is an organizational approach that, we're not going to be silly. We're going to be serious. That, I assume, is going to continue. I assume that is definitely part of the organization's philosophy about branding.
It is. And I think for two reasons. One, I'll say I'm a traditionalist when it comes to baseball. I just think you have all this beautiful, wonderful history, the simplicity of the logos, the uniforms, while there's some new rule changes, the game not ultimately changing very dramatically over time, that lends itself to a traditional logo. And I think historically, look, this team's been here since 1960. We've been affiliates of some of the most famous, iconic, traditional baseball marks and teams in the country. And when you've been here for that long, to go the more bizarre or goofy route doesn't make much sense. Clearly, that works in some markets for whatever the initiatives of those teams are. That works for those markets. I think we're very cautious to try to create an experience at the ballpark and create products at the ballpark where we feel like we can be the best pound for pound sports and entertainment experience in the country. And so that lends itself to being decidedly not minor league. Even though we are minor league, we understand that. And we understand the magnitude of major league and the changes there. But for this market and the dynamics of this market and what people like, they seem to really like the traditional. And I think from a merchandise perspective too, when we brand, whatever we can do to make things more lifestyle looking, right? Because not everybody wants to wear the traditional sports merchandise all over. And when we can just slap that little R on something in a discrete place or somewhere else, it opens us up to way different brands, a bigger brand portfolio that we can sell, different styles that we can sell, particularly to women who tend to like different marks than your traditional big, bold, centered sports thing. And so I think that's a key to the brand working as well. So I'm a traditionalist. I think our market lends itself to traditionalists and the history of the team and how long we've been here in the same spot, the same stadium. I mean, we've done a massive renovation of the stadium and continue to do so, but our seating bowl is still the exact same view and exact same basic seats, new seats, but exact same location as if you would have attended a game in 1960. And so I believe we're the longest running, at least in the Pacific Coast League, Triple-A franchise that stayed in the same city in the same stadium. And so there's a lot of history there to celebrate.
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to get out to another game and have another beer at the R Bar this summer. Aaron, thanks so much. I really appreciate you hopping on and talking about the Rainiers. Where can people find you online?
TacomaRainiers.com.
That's pretty easy. Aaron, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, welcome back. What a treat right now to be joined by the lead park guide from Mount Rainier National Park, Darby Robinson with the National Park Service. Darby, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you and I have never met. We emailed a little bit before this interview. I see now as I'm logging on, you've got the Rainiers, the sort of classic Rainiers baseball cap. So clearly you're a minor league baseball fan. You understand the significance of the team to the community. But you work in a place that is, obviously not related to the team. You work at one of our treasured natural places out there in the world, Mount Rainier National Park. What does Mount Rainier mean to that part of the country?
It's a great question. It means so much. And I've worked at some really spectacular parks, and they're all amazing in their own way. But Mount Rainier is almost a little unique in the sense that it like defines the entire region. I guess not too dissimilar than like the Grand Canyon that like kind of fits the entire state of Arizona. Mount Rainier is Washington, and it is kind of an icon of the entire Northwest. I mean, we're on the license plate, you'll have the name and the image everywhere, from car dealerships to beer to pretty much everywhere. You'll have this mountain's image everywhere because you can kind of see it from everywhere as well. So it's just a special iconic place that just means so much to so many Washingtonians.
Sure. So it's, being so prominent, so prevalent within, or throughout the state. Is there something about Tacoma in particular? Is there a reason that Tacoma would embrace Mount Rainier with their iconography and for the name of their team?
So Tacoma in particular, it's kind of a funny long-term rivalry with Seattle, both of these cities. But Tacoma is named Tacoma based off of one of the indigenous names for Mount Rainier. So our mountain, it's visible from 200 miles in every direction. And so it's going to have a lot of different names. There's been human habitation in this area for over 9,000 years. And every single indigenous tribe of this area had a name that they called this. And Tacoma, Tahoma, Tacopet, are some of several names there, but Tacoma became one of the more popular, different names than the official U.S. Geographic Service name. Tacoma itself, Mount Tacoma, became a very popular one, obviously, for the city of Tacoma, and there was a push to rename Mount Rainier in the early days to Mount Tacoma. That the city of Seattle actually kind of quashed, or at least heavily opposed, I should say, because it would give maybe Tacoma a little too much of that tourism buzz. But I think for the city of Tacoma, some of the best views are from there. It's got this name that resonates with it, and so I think they really do feel a very close kinship to our mountain.
This hat that you have behind you here, did you get that at a game?
I did. Yeah. Oh, it's one of the more popular kind of, you're a real Washingtonian if you're rocking either a Rainier's hat or gear or a Rainier beer gear, which are very distinctive ours, I found out.
Yeah.
They look very similar, but they're not the same.
You put them side by side, you can absolutely tell the difference. Yeah. And that was before I started this episode, before I started, researching this team. I kind of thought they were the same R. Very much they are not the same R. Let me ask you this about Rainier beer. What's the perception of Rainier beer out there?
For us out here, it's sort of like that, it's a fairly budget beer that's at the game. So it's like kind of there's those local staples that everybody kind of tends to enjoy. What's funny though, too, I think with that company in particular, the iconography of like climbing, of the mountains, it's so like connected, and its name is so tied to this mountain. And it's kind of funny that there's so many things named after this mountain. And I don't know if anybody actually knows who the person that this whole thing is named after, but our mountain has sort of taken over that name.
Yeah. Who's the person? Who was Mount Rainier named for?
So this was all named by explorer George Vancouver when he sailed into Commencement Bay in the Puget Sound, and he saw this mountain. He was the first European to see this mountain, to cast eyes on it, and decided to name it after his friend, another British Royal Navy admiral, Peter Rainier, who never saw the mountain to all circumstances. He was stationed mostly down in South America. The Cape, probably never saw it himself, but what a gift, what a really impressive friend. But Peter Rainier, not super significant in history besides the things that were named after him. So maybe he was just like a really good chum for some people. But I think what's very fun is that the fact that his last name has rain in it. And I think a lot of people, we get a lot of visitors that assume that the name Mount Rainier is about the fact that it rains a lot, or we get a lot of precipitation, that we're, Mount Rainier is the snowiest place on planet Earth where weather is recorded regularly. So it's like, oh, it makes sense. It's precipitation, but it's like, nope, British Admiral instead.
How about that? So, all right, this is going to be like the quintessential, like, worst question that interpreters at parks get. Someone shows up at Mount Rainier National Park. They have, I don't know, they have an afternoon. They're doing a cross-country road trip, Griswold style, and they've given themselves 3.5 hours at Mount Rainier National Park. What does that visitor do at Mount Rainier National Park?
It's a good question, because it really does vary depending upon the season you come to visit us.
Oh, yeah.
Right now, if you're coming, we have 15 feet of snow on the ground. So you might drive up to Paradise, which is the highest point that we plow in the wintertime, and maybe do a snowshoe walk or a ski. And kind of, if you're very lucky and you're on one of the days that the mountain is actually out and clear and you can see it, maybe get a nice glimpse of a very snowy peak. But if you're coming in the summertime, maybe you're coming up to drive the scenic roads. This park was it's one of the few parks that actually, if you only have a few hours, this was the first park that actually allowed automobiles inside. So the roads are designed specifically to show off the park from the car. So you can basically take that family road trip in the stuffed station wagon and explore, pull out at the different viewpoints, get some amazing sights of the mountain, some great wildflowers and meadows, maybe a marmot on the side of the road, and then keep on going.
I love this. All right, so this is, and if you need a moment to think about the answer to this question, I'm okay, and we can edit it here if we need to. But what are some distinctive qualities of Mount Rainier compared to other notable mountains? Like, what are some distinguishing qualities of Mount Rainier as compared to other mountains that we know out there?
So the big thing with Mount Rainier that sets us aside, because it's not just raw height. We stand 14,410 feet, which is really tall, but it's fifth tallest in the contiguous United States. It's bumped way down when it comes to adding in Alaska. But the key there is there's other ways to measure a mountain. Okay. And oftentimes, whatever makes your mountain rank higher, that's the one you kind of prefer. But for me, it just so happens I also think it's one of the more special ways to measure a mountain, and that's by prominence. And basically the height. You take the height of the tallest point on your mountain and then the next tallest point on the horizon. Okay. And so Mount Rainier becomes now the third tallest mountain by prominence at over 9,000 feet in the entirety of the United States. And that's only third behind Denali in Alaska, which beats us in every category you can imagine. Raw height, prominence, Denali. So we just always like to exclude Alaska because it's not fair. They have too much, they're too big, they have too much cool stuff. But behind Denali and Mauna Loa in Hawaii. Of course. So you think of that. And when you think of prominence, when you think of like what that is, you're thinking of like a Mount Fuji or a Kilimanjaro, this amazing mountains that like stand in the horizon that just rise up forever. It's not a mountain tucked in the in like the big mountain chains or like the Rockies or even like Everest where everything is super tall, but it's all kind of there. Right. what makes kind of Mount Rainier so special is that you can see it from downtown Tacoma. You can see it from the Rainier Stadium at Cheney Field. It's in the horizon, and it's that amazing, almost surreal. It doesn't look real when you're driving on like Interstate 5 and there's this humongous, impossibly big mountain just stretching out of nowhere, this huge volcano. It's that's what makes it so special and so unique, is that it just towers and dominates over the entire landscape.
Well, I can absolutely relate to what you're talking about here, because I live in Colorado. And so I can see, I can see the Rocky Mountains from my hometown here in Fort Collins. And, we have 50, people argue about this because it depends on how you measure it, but we have like 53, what we call 14ers, right? Like, so, and you're familiar with that term, obviously, but, for the listener, a 14er is a mountain whose elevation exceeds 14,000 feet. Our tallest mountain is Mount Elbert, 14,439 feet. And Mount Massive is right next to it and is like 6 feet shorter, right? Like, so we have all these mountains that, all these 14ers, but they all start at like 10,000 feet. So like from base to peak, they're only like 4,000 feet high, right? Like, so their prominence is way less than what you're describing for Mount Rainier here. The reason I ask this question is because I always try to think of with a baseball mascot, with a logo, what is it about that makes it an appropriate baseball logo? Can you think of what is it about Mount Rainier that would make it a good baseball logo, nickname, mascot for a team?
Well, I think with, in the major leagues, you have the Colorado Rockies. I think natural landmarks are kind of a fun way to kind of measure and keep that pride of a region, right? You want to pick something that defines a region, and what defines something more than just a gigantic volcano that's something that's like ever present. So plus you have like a giant volcano, so it's like you could erupt for a lot of runs, you could absolutely overwhelm somebody with a lahar flow. You can shake up the lineup with some earthquakes. I don't know. There's a lot of
really good.
I feel like the social media team can do a lot of fun with that.
Yeah. No, you're really good at this though. That was all really good. I like that a lot. So this is a place, Mount Rainier is a place that people might see from left field of a Tacoma Rainiers game. They might see as they're flying into Seattle, and they see it as they land, and it's this sort of passing moment with them, or for me, I visited the Pacific Northwest on a baseball road trip. I'm going to visit again. We're actually going to a Rainiers game in August. You are there all day, and not all day, every day. Hopefully they let you go home, but you're there all the time, right? Like this is your career, your vocation to get to interpret Mount Rainier to visitors and to work with other people who interpret Mount Rainier. What is it? What's the very most like special thing that you want people who only get to see it in a passing way? What is it that you want them to understand about this place, if they could understand it the way you understand it?
That's a really good question, because this is a place that people travel from all over the world to see. And I get to, kind of work there and get to have that as my backyard. I think what makes it so special is that it's dynamic. It's constantly changing, and it will constantly change. We have evidence to what could change in the future in the same Cascades to Mount St. Helens, an eruption that happened not too long ago, very recent to a lot of Washingtonians. You have Crater Lake, which is a giant hole that was filled after a massive, supermassive eruption. So you have potential what this could look like in the future if it loses its top, if it actually drops. You have glaciers. This is the single most glaciated peak. That's something that I think anytime I talk to people about the glaciers and get people to point those out, they're so special because there really isn't a lot of glaciers around the planet or anymore. And fewer and fewer every day. All of our glaciers, there's 25 named glaciers on this mountain. That's the same number of glaciers as there are in all of Glacier National Park. This is the single most glaciated peak. So getting to be up close and see sort of a living thing. It's, glaciers are a natural feature, but we do sort of talk about them in almost life and death circumstances because they are moving, they're changing, they are growing and receding. And so seeing the life on this mountain, both the living, the mammals, the birds, the plants, seeing the glacier, seeing the changes from season to season, from year to year, is very, very special to be able to see this mountain kind of grow. For the very brief moments that we'll be here. This mountain is much older than all of us. It'll outlive all of us. It'll keep growing. That's the nature of geology. But you get to sort of see all the differences and changes and the dynamicness of this place up close. And people should get to experience it. And I think once you do once, you'll want to come back and experience it again and see what's changed.
There's so many parallels, I think, between people who, have life lists of baseball stadiums, which is something that I do. I have a ballpark list. So many people I know have these life lists for national parks, right? Like, and there are national parks, there are other designations from the National Park Service. So there are a ton of national park units out there. And, Mount Rainier is definitely one of the most important ones in the country. And so I so appreciate you coming on and talking about it, because I the passion that interpreters have for the places that they interpret, to me, is just so, it's infectious, and it's so cool to get to talk to you about this. We talked about your Rainiers cap back there. Do you have a team? Is there a favorite? What's your rooting interest in baseball?
So I do. My wife and I do go to a lot of Mariners games. We do love and Rainiers games. They're both a lot of fun. We're not too far away, so we're huge baseball fans. I am from Florida originally. I'm from Tampa, 5th generation. So I actually am a not lifelong, but it's when I was 10, I got my first piece of Devil Rays gear when they just became a team. So I am a Rays fan. One of the few out there, but no, we the Mariners and the Rainiers, we kind of like, it's nice to have some local teams. So we've definitely adopted them. But as long as the Rays aren't in town, I'll be rooting hard for them.
That's about as good an answer as you can give right there. You rooted for the hometown team that you grew up with. You'll root for the Mariners when it doesn't interfere with your Rays, your Devil Rays. I love it. So where can people find Mount Rainier online, on social media, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we're on pretty much every social media. We have a Twitter page we mostly use for road updates, but we'll have a lot of cool stuff on our Instagram and Facebook page. So just look for the verified badges on all of those. But Mount Rainier National Park. And then check our website, nps.gov/MORA, to find out what's going on in the park, current conditions, and things like that. And, hopefully we'll be able to maybe do some more outreach stuff with the Tacoma Rainiers, get some actual baseball action, because everyone loves that. We've thrown out the first pitch at the Mariners. We've worked with the Mariners Moose before. We gotta get with the Tacoma Rainiers.
Tacoma Rainiers, are you listening? Holy smokes, that's just such a natural partnership right there. Darby, thank you so much. This has been a ton of fun. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about Mount Rainier, this beautiful place near this great ballpark. Maybe we'll catch you at Mount Rainier National Park during Baseball Palooza in August.
Sounds good.
All right.
We'll give you a tour.
Perfect. Thank you, Darby. All right, everyone. Welcome back. I am so happy to be joined right now by longtime listener of the podcast, longtime, very good friend of mine, my running buddy and Mariners fan, Chris Trebon. Chris, hello. How are you?
I'm great, Paul. I'm great. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
I feel like I should have also introduced you as the co-star of the Judge John Hodgman podcast. You will be appearing on a forthcoming episode, as recorded in Denver, with me on the Judge John Hodgman podcast. So we are co-stars with Judge John Hodgman on his podcast. We run together. We solve the world's problems. We talk baseball all the time. We talk about minor league baseball logos, not just because we are, great baseball fans, but because minor league baseball logos are great.
I will say I love talking minor league baseball logos with you. I think you do such an awesome job on this podcast, which is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to be here. You are the only person in the social media kind of Twitter sphere that is positive. And I really admire you for that. I admire the job you do. And especially in sports, you're not Paul the gatekeeper whatsoever. You make this very accessible. And I think that's why it's so easy to talk to you about minor league baseball logos.
Well, it's awfully kind of you. I am joined out there by some there are some uniquely positive people in their own ways. I know that you're not a big Twitter guy necessarily, so I do have to, whenever you talk about positivity on the Twitter sphere, Eric the Peanut Guy from the Tri-City Dust Devils, Pat Larson of the minor league baseball hat history, Ed Rivera of the Dad Hat Chronicles, Anady Tommaso of the baseball bucket list. Yeah, the list goes on and on. We got, it's a beautiful, but that's the thing, is this beautiful world of minor league baseball brings out the positivity in people. And so it's so much fun to talk about.
But you have created a really cool space, a cool group of people. Those people that you mentioned, I've heard them on your podcast before. In a way, I almost feel like I kind of know them. If they went running with us, we'd get along like a house on fire, right?
You know that's true. Actually, I kind of love this idea. I love the idea of getting together like the Curved Brim Media gang to go for a run and talk about baseball. And it's I think it would go really well. So, hey, let's talk about your Tacoma Rainiers. You are a born and bred Seattle Mariners fan, long suffering. I mean, we've been running together for a decade plus. You've been talking about like this is the year for the Mariners. Like for April, May, early June is like this is it. The Mariners. You were there with me at a Colorado Springs Sky Sox game when I interviewed Jabari Blash, who was then with the Tacoma Rainiers, and that was
best baseball name ever.
Jabari Blash. I mean, come on, like what a great baseball name. I want to just sort of start with this, like. Primarily, I mean, your fandom, I mean, I appreciate your kind words about the podcast and our conversations about minor league baseball, but primarily your fandom of baseball is relative to your major league team, the Seattle Mariners, who broke their 20-year curse this year. What does it mean to you as a Mariners fan that the Triple-A team is like right down the road and is, part of the sort of larger area and is part of this? I mean, Tacoma and Seattle are almost like, growing together into one town these days. How important is that to you as a fan of the Mariners?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like I grew up a Mariners fan. I went to one game at the Kingdome. I went to a game up in Bellingham when I was a kid. I've been to a couple Rainiers games. And I guess to answer the question, the proximity to Seattle isn't super important to me, but having the same team over the course of my life being that Triple-A team, I think it's cool to think about that, right? It's cool to know that these players that I followed in Tacoma are then boom on the Mariners, and to really grow with them. And I would say, you mentioned here our running history. We started running together in 2000, or we knew each other in 2007, right? That's when we were introduced. The Mariners have been terrible since then. I vividly remember telling you, we had a conversation about how many playoff games the Phillies have been in your life. And it was, you're like, you could probably get that number, but it might take you a while.
Yeah.
And I could tell you, like, the Mariners have been in a dozen playoff games in my life. They've been to the playoffs 4 times at that point. And your response was just this like, oh.
Well, and it didn't help that the Phillies, were in the midst of this. I mean, to 2007, when we started hanging out, when you moved to Fort Collins, that was the start of an unprecedented stretch of success for the Phillies, right? Like their first divisional title in more than a decade in 2007, and then to win the World Series in 2008, and then to win 3 more division titles before falling into obscurity and having the second longest playoff drought going into last year's postseason, behind only your Seattle Mariners and their 20-year playoff drought, which, by the way, reminds me, the moment that playoff drought ended, you and I had gone for a run. It was early October. I showed up at your house. We ordered some pizza. I showed up at your house with a 6-pack of what else but Rainier beer. You looked at the 6-pack and, of course, turned your nose up to it and said, I said, okay. And I drank a couple of them. I took the rest home because I knew you weren't going to drink them. You were going to use them to like water the lawn. It's not great beer, right? Like it's probably, I have compared it to Yingling. People like where I grew up, they love Yingling. It's not that good beer. I apologize to everyone who's hearing this who loves Yingling. It's not that great a beer. To me, Rainier beer is like the Yingling of the Pacific Northwest. But I had a couple, and that night, Cal Raleigh, whose nickname is
The Big Dumper.
the Big Dumper, he hit the home run, the game clinching walk-off home run that broke the Mariners playoff less streak while I was drinking a Rainier beer. Does that give you any pause at all to think like, okay, maybe maybe I will have a Rainier beer here because there's the connection between the beer and the Mariners, and then the beer and the Tacoma Rainiers baseball team. Any nostalgia there? Any sort of pulling on the heartstrings?
I love that story, and I love the fact that we got to experience that together. I'll remember that home run for a long time. It's one of the 5 signature Mariner moments over the course of my life.
Yeah.
Rainier beer, I would compare it more to the Coors Light, to the PBRs of the world. And again, apologies to the Rainier Beer Company.
They're okay.
Okay, I figured they were. But it's also, Paul, your listeners know from your opening that you live in Fort Collins, Colorado, home of Odell's and all these great breweries. It's really tough that we have these to stack up against Rainier beer.
True. We're in we're one of the many places that considers itself the beer capital of the world. New Belgium. I mean, people like Fort Collins has turned on New Belgium since they sold out to a multinational conglomerate, right? Like, so now it's Odell, and then there's 17 other small breweries right here in this tiny little town of ours. So it's a lot of good beer here. There's a lot of good beer here. If Fort Collins had its own minor league baseball team, I'm pretty sure it would have to be named after beer in some way. You've been to, you said 1 or 2, just not that many Rainiers games.
So one when I was a kid, and then I've been to a couple. I've been to Cheney a couple times over the last, let's say, 7 years.
Okay.
And just loved it. The stadium's awesome. It's in that pretty suburban area of Tacoma. The views are awesome. I love the Rainier Moose. And that that whole thing he's doing. And I've got to see some really cool players that have come up through the system. You and I have a great memory of going down to Colorado Springs and watching them. And obviously, you mentioned Jabari Blash, best name in baseball, and that dude was a stud. But we also saw Chris Taylor when he gave a ball to my son Jack, which was awesome. And my wife fell in love with him. But that's another story.
We all did a little bit that day.
We did. I love Chris Taylor. That's the one that got away, right?
So you mentioned your son. You've got Jack and Ryan, because you're a huge fan of the Jack Ryan series on Amazon. Your children, walk around in Rainier stuff. You have a Rainier sticker on your car. You have, the kids, Ryan in particular, because of the R, he's got the R Rainier's cap there. So what is it, what's that experience for you? Seeing your kids who have, basically were born and raised in Colorado, walking around in Tacoma Rainiers gear. Why is that important to you?
Yeah, I love it. There's an identity you have with your professional team, and I have Mariners gear for every day of the week. Maybe not to the extent of your Phillies collection, but I could probably wear a different piece of Mariner clothing every day. And to me, when I see someone in Mariner gear out and about, which is very rare if I'm not in Seattle, I freak out. It's great to meet. I want to find out why they're there, what their story is. If they're wearing the minor league affiliate of my team, it's a whole nother story, right? Totally. It's a deeper connection. And I think I have a certain amount of pride knowing that, my kids are rocking that, that same passion that I have for the minor league affiliate of the Mariners.
Right.
They're not, they couldn't name any Rainiers. And quite honestly, I think my kids still think Felix and Kyle Seager still play for the Mariners. But now Julio will change all that. For my kids and everybody else in the country. But to answer your question, I love it. Yeah. I really I love being able to have that deeper connection with the major league team that I am so passionately follow so passionately for so long. And I'm sure a lot of people, I think that's the interest in minor league ball, right? It's taking your fandom to just a slightly deeper level, and I don't know, it doesn't get much better than Triple-A. The experience and the level of ball is pretty amazing.
I actually totally agree with this. Is sort of an interesting sort of philosophical question to me. If aliens landed, in a spaceship in a field and showed up at your doorstep and demanded to be taken to a baseball game that represented the sport in its purest form, I would go to either a Double-A game or a Triple-A game. I think one of those two, it has to be it. And so, yeah, it's a certain way of appreciating minor league baseball. And there are different ways of appreciating minor league baseball, right? Because for me, it's the branding, it's the experience, it's the between innings things, it's like the atmosphere of being at a ball game. But there is very much a way of appreciating minor league baseball, which is I'm a fan of a team, and I'm going to go and I'm going to check out the prospects. I'm going to, if I'm a Phillies fan, I'm going to check out Andrew Painter in Lakewood and see, how he's doing with the Jersey Shore Blue Claws. We've commented already. We both live in Colorado. The Modesto Nuts used to be a Rockies affiliate, and now they're a Mariners affiliate. So you must see a lot of, I've been to Rockies games and seen Modesto Nuts caps walking around. When those affiliations change, it creates a little bit of that confusion, right? Like you see a Modesto Nuts cap, it's either like, hey, there's a Mariners fan, or that's a Rockies fan who got this out a while ago. Or it's someone like me who went to a minor league baseball game and had to buy a hat and has way too many of them now.
Well, part of the other thing about Triple-A, maybe this is where you were going, is that affiliation, at least with the Mariners, has stayed the same.
Yeah.
With the lower leagues, that shuffled a lot. I went to a game in Jackson, Tennessee, when the Mariners affiliate, Double-A affiliate, was the Generals. Mm-hmm. Amazing game, amazing experience. Talked about Jabari Blash with an older dude who was, who was there, just a huge fan of the Mariners like me, there by himself, and got to talk prospects going back to, the early 2000s for a team that, by the way, hadn't been to the playoffs in 20, or at that time, maybe 15 seasons.
Right. Just
an amazing experience, but the Jackson Generals are no longer a Mariners affiliate, right? They've moved on to somebody else.
Yeah. Well, and the Mariners' new Double-A affiliate is the Arkansas Travelers. I'm actually, at the time that this episode drops, I'm going to be like a week away from my first ever Arkansas Travelers game. So on one of our many runs, maybe Tuesday morning at 5:45 in the pitch dark, we're going to have to get out there, and you're going to have to give me the lowdown on who are the players I need to be checking out on the Arkansas Travelers when I'm there for opening day in April.
That's exciting. I'll dig in.
Yeah.
I accept your challenge.
Yeah. And we do have a lot of time to talk about these things on runs. You and I have run a couple of full marathons together. #humblebrag. We had a full 4 hours to talk about all this stuff at the Phoenix Marathon just a few short years ago.
We solved a lot of problems.
We have solved so many of the world's problems. This is going to be my other podcast someday. We've talked about this. I'm just going to record our conversations that we have while we run, and just post them. And everyone will hear all of our recipes that we talk about. And what are we wearing to work that day? Chris Trebon, co-star of the Judge John Hodgman podcast. Thank you so much for joining me and talking about the Mariners and your Tacoma Rainiers. We will get together, and you can have one of your earwax IPAs, and I will have one of my, caramel shoe polish porters. And we'll talk about how we're not drinking Rainier beer.
Paul, thanks so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it, bud.
Okay. Chris is not on social media. I will put his cell phone number and email address in the show notes. Chris, thanks for coming on the podcast. At long last, every Tuesday you show up at 5:45 for one of our runs. I show up at 5:47 for one of our runs. And you are there listening to this week's episode. It's an honor that you listen. Thanks for coming on the show at long last.
Go Mariners.
It is time once again for America's favorite podcast segment, Studio Simon Stumpers. Dan Simon of Studio Simon, designer extraordinaire, prolific minor league baseball and other sports branding logo expert. Dan, how are you?
I am spectacular today. Thank you very much for asking. How are you, Paul?
I'm doing well, but the last few weeks you have been, to coin a baseball phrase, you have been bringing the heat with your Studio Simon Stumpers here. So I'm kind of licking my wounds. Got to have a short memory. Got to come into this at bat confident here, hoping to get off the mat. I'm trying to just pull all of my baseball euphemisms out here. So I'm ready.
Even though this segment's called Studio Simon Stumpers, I'm not trying to stump you. I'm not trying to make this difficult. And every single time, I think there was one that we've done so far where you just made a wild guess.
Yeah.
But every single time you've got thinking that is spot on. Now, whether that leads to the correct answer or not, to me, it's not important. You're always on the right track, and I'm not trying to trip you up or anything. I'm rooting for you. I want you to barrel up the ball and hit the ball over the wall. So let's see how you do today.
All right.
Let's get at it with a minor league baseball brand identity that's based on a team named after a mountain, Mount Rainier. Our question today deals with mountains. There have been numerous minor league baseball logos that, whether in the primary logo, the cap logo, or otherwise in their logo suite, have featured mountains in it.
Okay.
You've got the Tennessee Smokies, the West Virginia Black Bears, Colorado Springs Sky Sox, Asheville Tourists, even the Tucson Padres. I can go on and on. There are others as well.
Okay.
So our question today asks, which of these particular clubs' brand identity features a logo with mountains that are not even in the state in which their stadium is located?
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your possibilities are A, the Johnson City Cardinals, an identity that no longer exists because they got downsized and are now playing by a different name. So A, the Johnson City Cardinals, B, the Idaho Falls Chuckers, or C, the Northwest Arkansas Naturals. Okay, so one of these teams has a logo that features mountains, but those mountains are not in the very state in which that team plays.
Yeah. So the Johnson City Cardinals, the Idaho Falls Chuckers, which is my immediate inclination is to go with the Chuckers, and the Northwest Arkansas Naturals. I've been to both a Chuckers game and a Naturals game. I can picture their logos. The Naturals, I know they have like the waterfall. They've got this whole sort of like nature scene. So that would be a possibility. The Chuckers, they're playing in Idaho, and there's mountains all around them out there in the West, in different states for sure. The Johnson City Cardinals, I can't picture mountains in their logo. I'm not picturing mountains in that logo.
Well, let me say this. This is because I want to make sure you're not fooling or tripping yourself up. The question wasn't, do these teams have mountains? Each of these teams have logos with mountains in them.
Okay.
So there were mountains in all three of the logo identities for the teams we're asking about here.
Okay. Which makes me think, as I said, my inclination was towards Idaho Falls. Here's another sort of point in favor of Idaho Falls is that I know that you created that logo. I don't know who created Northwest Arkansas and Johnson City. So you might have certain insight into Idaho Falls. Idaho Falls Chuckers, final answer.
Okay.
Whenever you say okay like that, it means I got it wrong.
When have I tipped my hat?
You have.
Tip my cards. I'm sorry. I got that.
Oh, you tipped your cards. Johnson City Cardinals, final answer.
No. You've already given an answer. And when I am watching, when I'm playing Trivial Pursuit with my wife and my son Casey. It's something whenever he comes home to visit, that board's always brought out, and we're playing at least one, if not several, games of Trivial Pursuit. One of the oft said phrases that you will hear in the Studio Simon breakfast room is always go with your first answer. And the first thing you said is, my first thought is Idaho Falls Truckers. And then you were starting to think it over, and you were, I was thinking, okay, he's going to pick a different one because he's thinking it through. And then you went with final answer, Idaho Falls Truckers. In this case, the adage holds true. Always go with your first answer. You were correct, Paul.
Holy smokes. Okay. Thank goodness.
Okay. So here's the deal. Well, first of all, let's talk about the other two.
Okay.
In Johnson City, you have Buffalo Mountain right there within the city limits. So for sure, not only are there mountains pictured in their logo in the same state, they're in the same city. With the Northwest Arkansas Naturals, you mentioned the waterfalls, and there's also something suggesting a mountain. And you've got in Northwest Arkansas the Ozarks. For any of you who have not seen the Jason Bateman TV show Ozark, watch it. It's worth the watch.
Super good.
And with regard to the Idaho Falls Truckers, I don't think it's any surprise that with playing in a city named Idaho Falls, you are in Idaho. However, the mountains featured there are the Grand Tetons, which are in Wyoming. So they're big, and you can see them. Paul, you mentioned you've been to a game there. You can see them. They're just in the neighboring state. So you're correct, and so your box score now has a hit in the hit column.
Thank goodness to get back to get off the schneid there to finally put one in the win column. Dan Simon of Studio Simon, thank you once again for your Studio Simon Stumpers. We will catch you next time. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome, Paul. Looking forward to that next time. Bye-bye.